The Middle East, Israel, Palestine, Gaza. Extremely sensitive topic, extremely current for something that's been going on for a really, really long time.
A revolution is a fundamental and relatively sudden change in political power. An organization which occurs when the population revolts. This is the Marco Martins Revolution, powered by Vodcast TV. Visit vodcasttv.com for more.
This is the Marco Martins Revolution. Joining me, my dear friend, Gary Berkowitz. How are you?
Hey, Marco. Good, thanks. And yourself, man. And thank you so much for having me.
We're going to have a very sensitive debate of what I call a very complex issue and what you call a very simple issue.
Well, I mean, just to correct that a little bit, I wouldn't say it is a simple issue. I think it's an issue that people can view in a simple way that it's been made very complicated.
Okay. So I want to get back to that in terms of the issue itself. And I want to start off on really who you are in relation to this and why you feel it's important to have your say in the particular stance or direction in which you are going to say it now.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that. So first, I just want to say that we've known each other a long time. Mm-hmm. Pretty much like half my life is how long we've known one another. We met.
It's not inaccurate, yeah, probably 17 years ago.
18 years.
Yeah.
And I think I'm correct in saying that you've always seen me in the same way. That when you knew me when I was 18, 19 years old, I don't think you see me much different right now being 35 years old.
Mm.
Like I haven't changed how I engage with you or how you've seen me engage with other people, that I'm effectively the same person, that my views haven't really changed.
Yeah, no irregular vast changes besides a small amount of normal maturity that you would expect that would come along
Hopefully
with
at least
age.
a bit of smaller maturity.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to give a bit of a foundation to how I came to have the views I have, and how that foundation was created. So, I've just written stuff down so I can just,
of course, please
keep track and not miss stuff out.
If politicians are allowed to read speeches, you are too.
So, okay, I was born an Orthodox Jewish person in two Orthodox Jewish parents, not practicing the religion as in we were never religious, but I am an Orthodox Jewish person. I attended an Orthodox Jewish primary school. I attended an Orthodox Jewish high school. So I just wanted to firstly put that out in the sense of from the cultures we're born into, and the environments we're born into, we get shaped in certain ways. We have certain conditioned biases. So I started learning about World War II and the Holocaust from about the age of 10. I wasn't pressured into learning about the stuff. It wasn't put in front of me like, here's a book, Gary, read this. Being born into a Jewish household and having two brothers that are a lot older than me, the books were there on the shelves. So it's topics that I got engrossed into from a young age that left a curiosity, a morbid curiosity throughout my life. And with reading about that time and that era and what was going on, World War II and the Holocaust, with it came the associated themes of propaganda, conditioning, and dehumanization. So that genocide, the Holocaust against Jewish people, that was allowed to happen because of the total apathy towards Jewish people within Germany and around the world, and obviously the countries that Germany conquered. there are countless stories, and I think we've all heard this, about Jewish refugees trying to escape Nazi Germany, Nazi Europe, on boats, trying to go to England, trying to go to America, and literally being told no and being turned back by countries that could have taken them in to go back to certain death. So that genocide was essentially allowed to happen from world bodies and powers who did nothing to prevent or even just to take in Jewish refugees. Later, but not in the same detail, I started learning about the Rwandan genocide, which took place. And I mean, obviously, I didn't learn about it at the time it was taking place because I was only 6 years old at that time. But when I did start learning about it and realized that this genocide took place 50 years after the genocide of the Holocaust, and at the same time that Nelson Mandela was being inaugurated as president. And the realization or finding out that the United Nations, which came from the League of Nations after World War II, that's when the United Nations formed, their main mandate was to prevent another genocide. But in the Rwandan genocide, the United Nations was doing everything in their power not to actually label it a genocide, because then they would actually have to do something. So once again, 50 years later, from the Holocaust, the world bodies, the world powers did not do what they were literally mandated to do. And another genocide took place. At the youngest, I would have been 9. At the oldest, I would have been 11 years old at Emmarentia Primary School. I stood up to an actual friend of mine who was bullying a new kid that had recently joined and hadn't yet made friends or anything. So what took place was the person I was friends with took the lunchbox of the new kid. He put it through a hole in the tennis court fence, and then he started tying up the fence, tying up the loose wires. And this new kid came to just try and get his lunchbox back. He was on his haunches, just trying to literally go through the fence to take his lunchbox back, whilst my friend was messing with him as this guy's on his haunches, physically messing with him a bit. I grabbed my friend, I pulled him away from the new kid that he was bullying, and I swung him away, and I ended up tearing a few buttons of his shirt. That was literally, could have been or was the one of, if not the most aggressive things I've ever done in my life. Mm-hmm. I've never been in a fight. I've never thrown a punch. I've never had anyone throw a punch at me. There's been some times over the years that people have tried to get in fights with me, but I wasn't entertaining it. So I just wanted to try to give an idea, from such a young age, I've understood, look, I was bullied and teased a lot, so that's where it would have come from. And people can often continue the experiences they've had, or they can rebel against them. I rebelled against the idea of bullying and teasing. Okay, so then at the age of 12, 13 years old, I'm Jewish, we have bar mitzvah. We have bar mitzvahs coming of age. So when you have a bar mitzvah, you go for bar mitzvah lessons. I ended up going to a teacher that actually lived in the same road as me in Emmarentia. Just to give him a name, his name was Michael. And I remember at the very first lesson we had, Michael, who was a religious Jewish person, kept all the laws, the dietary laws, the Sabbath laws, everything. A proper practicing Orthodox Jewish person. On the very first lesson, he told me what he said were the 3 pillars, the 3 foundations of Judaism. Now, what he was saying to me at that point made me very proud to belong to this religion that had these beautiful pillars. But at the same time, I knew what he was saying was of any religion, of just being human. It just made it a little bit more being a bit proud of it, that I know I'm Jewish and I identify as being Jewish, and I'm going for a bar mitzvah lesson, and this guy's saying these are the 3 pillars of Judaism. So pillar number 1 said Judaism's view on the sanctity of life. And for every pillar, for every foundation, he gave a metaphor and he explained it a bit. So on this one, he used the Talmudic proverb, which states to save one life is to save the world entire. Just for interest's sake, this same proverb is actually also found in the Quran, just as a point of interest. And then he explained this. To save one life is to save the world entire. He said, Gary, you do not know the potential of another human being. You have absolutely no idea what someone else can achieve then or at some point in the future. You have no idea about the potential of that person's unborn generations. So for argument's sake, that person that you murdered or that person that you didn't save, their child, their unborn generation could have been the Messiah. You've just robbed the world of the Messiah. Their unborn generation could have cured cancer. You've just robbed the world of the person that would have cured cancer. Pillar number 2, he said Judaism's view, and again, humanity's view, or religion's view on charity. And then he gave the metaphor. He said, if someone needs a car within your means, you don't buy them a Beetle, you buy them a Ferrari. Now, of course, that's not practical, but taking that principle, he said a little bit more, but again, he was just making the metaphor. If someone needs a meal, you don't give them a sandwich or 10 Rand, you take them out for a 3-course meal. Now, again, the right thing to do would be to get them a month's worth of groceries within your means. And then the last pillar, he said, was Judaism's view on humiliating another human being. And he used a Hebrew phrase. I don't know it. My Hebrew is basically non-existent. But the Hebrew phrase he used, he then translated it. And he said, when someone dies, the blood is drawn from their face. They become white. They lose color. And he says the same thing happens when you humiliate another human being, but then they're still alive to bathe in that shame, in that humiliation. So he said that to humiliate another human being, according to Judaism, is kind of like murdering someone twice. So those pillars, those principles he taught me or reinforced to me have been have resonated deeply within me, those kind of values throughout my life.
Would you say they've been influential on the outcome of your life?
Yes, and how I engage with people, very much so. So that was at the age of 12, 13. At the age of 15, 16, I went on a tour, an organized tour called March of the Living. So it's an international tour. It's almost exclusively participated in by Jewish people, but as far as I know, anyone can go on it. But it is almost only it is almost
exclusively attended by
Jewish people, because the whole tour is specifically you start off, it's a Holocaust remembrance tour where it's called March of the Living because you follow the same routes that the Nazis took the survivors of the death camps and the concentration camps once the Russians were advancing and were going to be taking over those camps. They took them on what was known as death marches, where they were marching them to death. So it's called March of the Living because you're now remembering all those people that were killed in the death camps, concentration camps, and went on those death marches. You're now doing it all this time later when, there's the state of Israel, which is for the Jewish people, so that this kind of thing will never happen again. It's very much the messaging and the narratives that I grew up with, that I believed in very, very much. And on this tour, yes, I mean...
I'm going to interrupt you there, and we're going to get back into the rest of the tour, but there's something that you said specifically there that I don't think the entirety of the audience grasps the concept for and understands fully, is that the Holocaust, you said, was allowed to happen because of governments, states, etc., turning away Jewish people who were looking to flee Nazi occupation in the regions in which they lived. Many Jewish people lived in Eastern Europe. These were the first areas impacted. And not only Eastern Europe, we see that spread of Jewish civilian populations in France, Western Europe, all the way into the UK, which was because of the English Channel largely disconnected from Nazi occupation proper during World War II. And what happened was, as part of the Nazi ideology, was that the Jewish people were responsible largely for the downfall of the Aryan German race. A lot of responsibility was placed upon the Jew post an economic downturn, which is something that I want to get to a little later on. So a massive economic downturn post World War I, very poor people, a lot of debt from the United States government placed upon Germany when the United States went through their own economic recession, came to reclaim a lot of that debt, massive economic downfall in Germany, rise of the Nazi Party, who blamed the economic downturn on the Jewish man.
Essentially blamed the loss of World War I on Jewish people.
On Jewish people as well. So there were several factors as to why the Jew was so bad and the German Christian was so very good. Look, Jews weren't the only target for their hatred. They also hated communists hugely.
Romanies, homosexuals.
Many, many things. And pushed east to conquer communism, specifically in Russia, a place that was very welcoming of Jewish people at the time as well.
I wouldn't say very welcoming.
At the time, relative to the rest of the region.
Pogroms in Russia.
Sure.
Yes.
So, okay. So during this invasion of Europe, especially as they occupied Eastern Europe, Jewish people were taken in by the Nazis, unbeknownst necessarily as to what would happen to these Jewish people at the time, specifically.
Taken in?
So the Nazi Party would go and conquer a region.
And absorb the population.
Go to the government would sign off and say, we are now ruled by the Nazi Party. I am still the ruler of this country. For example, however, I report to Adolf Hitler and his party.
Sure.
Right. Part of those negotiations was an immediate handover of all of your Jewish public. This was common. As soon as they conquered a region, as they went into Belgium, the ruler of Belgium, yes, sure, here's all our Jews. Go through door to door, knock on the doors, put a Star of David as an arm patch on their arm so that they can be identified, and off you go to wherever the Germans are taking you. The narrative at the time was that they were going to ghettos and boroughs. Partially, yeah. But mostly they just said we were isolating them because they're undesirable to us. We're isolating them. So there was no general narrative of the genocide and the slaughter of the people. But what that meant for Jewish people across Europe, as they started getting word of Nazi occupation in other countries and the fear that set upon Jewish people for gross anti-Semitism that was coming their way and endangering their lives, well-being, livelihoods, health, everything. They didn't have a homeland to retreat to necessarily. They could try and retreat to a neighboring country, but they would be reliant on that neighboring country's willingness to accept them. There wasn't a willingness to accept them in many cases. They would get onto a boat, try head off to the United States, and then some of them or many of them were sent back. Some arrived in countries safe and sound, however, very, very few. In light of this, or when this came to light post-World War II, when the understanding of the real situation that faced the Jewish people over that very long period of World War II, many, many years of suffering of Jewish people in Europe in particular, the understanding that the requirement for Jews to have a homeland of their own, to be able to retreat to and defend themselves from, so so just to simplify the narrative of what you were saying, it was taught to you, was that the global population, the global governments, etc., post World War II agreed that never again is a famous Jewish statement.
So just to quickly address some conflation here. So Zionism, which is a political movement, started in 1898. So we're talking about 41 years before the start of World War II.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
before World War I.
Sure, I want to get to that. But what I'm saying is just generally why the understanding of that, of what was taught to many people, and the understanding of why Israel became a state, is that immediately in the aftermath of World War II, the world got together and sort of said, this cannot happen again. This was extremely unfair upon the Jewish people. They were far too vulnerable, and they had nowhere to go. They need somewhere to go.
that's
And
making
this
it-
is where the next point
Sure,
comes. So
but-
this is a simplification.
But I'm saying that's the narrative. That's the narrative
Sure.
we're taught.
So this is what I'm saying.
Israel would have most likely still been given to the Jewish people, even if there wasn't a Holocaust.
Okay, so what I'm saying, sure, fine. I'm talking about what the
narrative I
reason,
brought
the
up,
narrative
there
that
must
you
be
brought
there
up.
must be a homeland for Jewish people so they can protect
just
themselves.
to explain where you were in that point in your story, is that this is why, and to this day,
One of the
the
reasons.
words, yeah. Well, this is why the world.
Never again.
Well, never again is a Jewish phrase,
No,
right?
apparently that actually comes from Nazis, from Aryans.
So we'll get to that. But this is why the world deemed it necessary for the Jewish people to have a homeland of their own, completely and fully, that they were allowed to defend and build a strong military from, in order to defend themselves from this happening again.
The narrative.
So I'm saying this is the knowledge that the world, that the globe was set upon the world
the
at the
narrative
time.
that the world was told. I just need to say, because remember, it's not people. World bodies do stuff in their interests.
Sure.
Palestine was given to Jewish people.
We'll get to that.
Because it was in the interests of the British.
Okay, so I'm going to get
But I
to
think-
that now. I want to get back to your story where you were, because I interrupted you just to explain why you said that specifically.
Well, why I said that was because of conditioning that I went through.
Sure.
That because of the Holocaust,
Yes.
and I'll also will go into, get into more detail. I used to consider myself a Zionist because of those narratives, because of learning about the Holocaust.
Okay, I
because
think that we'll
believed
get
in-
there. I want you to carry on
Okay.
because I interrupted your story, and I think it's very important. So these were just the brackets in your story. I want you to finish, and then I want to dissect these later.
So I was just saying, it's about the age of 15, 16, I went on this tour March of the Living, where you go to Poland, you go to death camps, to concentration camps. I've stood inside of a gas chamber. I've seen crematoriums that were blown up, but I mean, you can still see
They were rebuilt, right? By the
No, they
some of
weren't.
them were.
Not that I don't think so. I don't think any of the stuff was actually rebuilt. You see stuff that's like half demolished, half blown up.
Okay.
And then after this, and you can imagine the energy of this kind of tour, going to death camps and concentration camps in Poland, you go to Israel for Yom HaAtzmaut, the Day of Independence. So you go from this very dark, somber, depressing places and energy to jubilation and I'm just trying to even think of like the words, because I can remember the experience. I can remember how incredible and how high the energy was. But it's a very, like, it's structured like this. I mean, obviously it makes sense to do the tour like this. So not long after getting back from this tour, at the same age, 15, 16, at high school, Jewish high school, I was accused, labeled by a Hebrew teacher in Hebrew class, as well as a bunch of my peers, as being anti-Israeli and pro-Palestinian, for saying nothing more than, I believe Palestinians deserve sovereignty and autonomy. And again, this is when I still viewed myself as a Zionist. This is when I've just come back from a Holocaust tour.
Roughly 2003.
2006? No, it would have been more like roughly 2004, I would say.
Okay.
2004, I'd say. So at the time, I was just saying, and for years after this, many years after this, I used to consider myself a Zionist. I would be the one arguing and countering the kind of points and claims that I now am arguing against. I realized at some point that I actually misunderstood what Zionism was and what the implications of it were and are. That I realized that I was conditioned into accepting this ideology and identifying with this ideology and it resonating with me before I actually understood what it actually was, what the definition of it was, what it actually meant.
Let me read that definition for you right now,
Sure.
just for clarity. Zionism is a Jewish nationalist movement that has had as its goal the creation and support of a Jewish national state in Palestine, the ancient homeland of the Jews. Through Zionism originated, though Zionism originated in Eastern and Central Europe in the latter part of the 19th century, it is in many ways a continuation of the ancient attachment of the Jews and the Jewish religion to the historical region of Palestine, where one of the hills of ancient Jerusalem was called Zion.
Cool. Just to add some stuff on there, Israel was not the only country considered to be the homeland of Jewish people. There's actually quite a few. And Zionism has nothing to do with the religion of Judaism. In fact, the actual Jewish religion, what's the word I'm looking for? Outlaws. It makes it illegal, makes it sacrilegious for there to be a Jewish national homeland with the temple still being destroyed. So that's why very, very religious Jewish people are anti-Zionists, because it actually goes against the religion of Judaism. It's antithetical to Jewish law, to actual Judaism, for the state of Israel to exist. And just one thing I'll just, before I continue just saying on that. So I used to subscribe to the narrative, but it's a conditioned narrative from Israel, that Israel was the tagline goes, a country without people for a people without a country, which is completely false, because there were many, many people living in Palestine. It wasn't a land without a people. For a people without a land. Sorry, the word is actually land. Okay, it's something I can send to you, but there's a Jewish person that actually made a comparison where they say that actually, I'll get to it. Basically, I'll get to that, sorry. Okay, so what I've now given is the foundation of the lessons, morals, values, and principles that have been central and with me my entire life, and which were installed in me from Jewish values, the most central, fundamental Jewish values. And it's because of those values that have actually led me to appear on this podcast to address what is going on in Palestine, Israel. As someone who's learnt about propaganda, the conditionings that go with it, and that leads to dehumanization and genocide, which is the end result of propaganda, conditioning, and dehumanization. As someone who's always held very dear the most pivotal Jewish values, which I regard as universal human values, I simply cannot and would never be able to not address and challenge, and I use this word very intentionally from having learnt about World War II and the Holocausts and dictatorships and fascisms from a very young age. I simply cannot and will never be able to not address and challenge the fascist Zionist entity that is the state of Israel, and the brutality, oppression, dispossession, maiming, and murdering that has been meted out on innocent Palestinians for decade upon decade upon decade. So Gaza, you've probably heard it, is known, and it's been quite commonly known by people that will accept this descriptor as the largest open-air prison in the world, where 2.2 million Palestinians live there, and they have no control over their lives. In fact, with my own knowledge and learning about, again, World War II and the Holocaust and concentration camps and death camps from such a young age, I think calling it a concentration camp would actually be more accurate, as prisons have much longer life expectancies than that of people who live in Gaza, as well as prisons don't have the electricity and water simply turned off by an occupying force. Prisons don't have food and fuel cut off from an occupying force. Prisons don't have routine airstrikes and carpet bombings and phosphorus being used on its inhabitants. Another distinction are that prisons are inhabited by people who have been judged as criminals for something they have actually done, while people, human beings who struggle in every way to just survive in Gaza, are mostly just innocent people, innocent women and children. Right now, in the year 2023, 78 years after the end of World War II and the genocide of the Holocaust, and 29 years after the Rwandan genocide, there's once again an entire nation millions of people who are at risk of a genocide. Will the world bodies and powers once again fail in their duties to prevent such a thing, or will they allow it to take place as they allowed the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide to take place? Okay, so I'll just end off with this. I've got a lot of other stuff to speak to, but this is pretty much, and thank you for the time, what I wanted to say. For you or anyone that is interested at any point, I have an absolute wealth of resources, almost exclusively from Jewish people, Holocaust survivors, Jewish Israeli soldiers, Jewish historians and activists who are all pro-Palestine and anti-Zionism. And I think just to speak to the idea that Holocaust survivors would be pro-Palestine and anti-Zionist speaks volumes.
Okay, so now I think is an opportune time to go through a little bit of the history of the region, of what was formerly Palestine, pre-1946, and how it...
48.
Okay, pre... so yes, the UN got involved in 1947, put together a plan of how they deemed to things. So I'm just remarking purely at the end of World War II, where plans and strategies started coming forward towards providing Israel with a homeland, or the Jewish people rather, with a homeland in the region.
Well, I think we should probably start with the Balfour Declaration.
So I want to start off with the history of the region in general. So the region, over thousands of years of human history, is a region that has more information on it than most of our knowledge of the world, because our knowledge of it predates written history. It's a land that was under control of various empires, including the Assyrians several thousand years ago, the Babylonians, the Persians, followed by the Greeks, the Romans, and the Byzantines, before eventually the Ottoman Empire conquered and ruled the region for many, many years. It was then conquered during the British Mandate, where the British, in the aftermath of World War I, declared to have some sort of administrative mandate over Palestine. So... and they aimed to establish a national home for the Jewish people as early as then, pre-World War II, according to this. So
yeah, I just want to reinforce that. Pre-World War II.
Pre-World War II, there was already a plan.
They were wanting to establish it as a Jewish national homeland.
Yes.
Which shows that the Holocaust could very well actually have had no bearing on Israel being proclaimed.
It's certainly sped up the process.
I could agree and say it's sped up.
Sure.
But the plan was there
pre-World War II. So the region itself, in terms of, and there's a statement here, or there's a narrative today, currently within our current discussions, of Israel being the colonialists and occupiers of the region, having taken it from the Palestinian people. Israel themselves.
Well, I would say more accurately in terms of what they were originally given, in terms of the formation of Israel in 1948 by the UN, by Britain, and then all the additional land that they have kept on taking, the settlements that they keep building,
to 1969,
which is against international law.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, is more specifically when they're talking about them being a colonial occupying force, is they've taken land that was never actually legally by the UN, by Britain, given to them.
Because obviously Britain administratively controlled that region, as within their own words,
as a colony, essentially.
As a colony,
yeah,
essentially.
So it is them giving their colony away.
It was them giving their colony away to Israel, but they gave a portion of their colony away to Israel and gave the other portion sovereignty as Palestine.
Well,
as a two-nation state initially.
Again, so that was the initial plan. But just to be more specific, what they offered the Palestinians was essentially a slap in the face, was an insult. They were giving people that were not indigenous to the land, they were giving them the majority of it, and then they were giving the minority of it, they offered the minority of it to the Palestinians. I mean, just to give quite a simple metaphor or analogy that people often use, it would be akin to you having worked for 20 years, saving up, paid a deposit, getting a bond on your house, and then someone comes and kicks you out and says, you can have this one bedroom, and now you have to deal with that. That would be an analogy to that. You were there, you paid for it, your parents, your grandparents, actually, it was their house, and you inherited it. That would be even a bit more accurate.
Okay.
And someone comes just one day, kicks you out, they have bigger weapons than you, and they say, well, you know what, you can at least have this bedroom.
Okay, so that's just like a brief look at the history of the region. And obviously, this is where we had this discussion of it being extremely simple and extremely complex. And these are the true complexities around it, is that who has right to land where is still extremely complex an issue, because of how far back do you look to see who's right, who's determined which war was the bad war.
No, so I think that's quite simple, right? Indigenous people are indigenous people. Like, we can agree that the Aboriginals in Australia were decimated by the British. We can agree that the indigenous people of America, the Native Indians, the Native Americans, there's a genocide in an entire continent that were decimated by the British. If you're talking about going back to biblical times, then we might as well be talking about miracles.
I think that's the key point here, is that which war is the bad war and at which time, right?
It was Palestine before it was Israel. Therefore, everyone that was living there before it was Israel were Palestinians, and Jewish Palestinians.
Yes.
Muslim Palestinians,
Christian
Palestinians, and they actually all lived with one another harmoniously. So it was only when you were having an outside power, a colonial force, an occupying force, saying we are going to give priority to these people because we identify with them more, we trust them more, we want them to control this land, that then animosity, clashes, etc. happened. But prior to Israel being Israel, it was Palestine.
Okay, so let's move on then to now, today, currently. You believe that there's an unjust war upon which you would agree is currently a terrorist organization, Hamas.
I used to much more easily be able to simply call them terrorists. I mean, we can say the ANC and Mandela were labeled as terrorists, and many people viewed them as terrorists. If I, as someone who's never physically harmed another human being in my entire life intentionally, if I had to live the life of a Palestinian, it's also kind of commonly known that Palestinian children experience more trauma on a day-to-day basis than any other children in the world. If I had to be born into that kind of life, of trauma, of no opportunities, of not being able to even understand what my potential could possibly be, I can't, in all honesty, say that I don't think myself I might engage in similar barbarism, similar horrors, similar terrorism. So when I used to, before I unlearned a lot of my conditionings and conditioned biases, when I still used to consider myself a Zionist, every single day of the week, I'd simply think of Hamas as terrorists. What's quite interesting, which I only actually found out recently, are the different countries that either label Hamas as a terrorist organization or not. And Norway and Switzerland are two of the ones that don't regard Hamas as a terrorist organization.
Do they have a designation for them?
Norway does not designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. In 2006, Norway distanced itself from the European Union, claiming that it was causing problems for its role as a neutral facilitator. So they don't designate. Switzerland does not designate Hamas as a terrorist organization in accordance with Swiss neutrality. So that, I guess, is a bit...
So they have no designation for them. They're just trying to be neutral.
But Switzerland have always just done that. But I've thought to myself that I would be interested to know what Sweden says, what Switzerland says. Because it almost seems like there's a common factor that the Scandinavian countries, the countries with some of the highest social programs, the least poverty, least unemployment, best healthcare programs in the world, it almost seems like there's a commonality there that they don't designate Hamas as a terrorist organization. Now, I can easily say that I condemn the slaughter of any innocent people. I can't imagine anyone not saying that. But what I've also been bewildered when engaging with Jewish people I know and Jewish people I do not know is they cannot bring themselves to simply say, I condemn the killing of innocent Palestinian women and children. The conditioning is so deep that no matter what, they consider Palestinians as inhuman, that they consider all Palestinians as terrorists. There's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian.
I see very little of that, I'll be honest. And I think it's people are afraid to word things in the correct way. And I believe that a lot of where that comes from is people placing blame upon terrorists for the casualties of Palestinian civilians. So I don't see a lot of people sort of blatantly, because I think that would be very inhumane and not very aligned with most human beings that I know, who are, because I like most human beings.
With lots of Jewish people.
Okay.
Jewish people I know,
so
Jewish people I don't know.
Perhaps there's a misunderstanding of what you're quoting and what you're meaning for them. Do you know what I'm saying?
I literally said to them, would you be willing to simply condemn the killing of innocent Palestinian women and children? And they know that I'm referring to Israel soldiers, Israel planes killing innocent Palestinian women and children.
Yeah, you see, but that's still open-ended in a way, because it is actually a complex issue if you present the idea that the only option to eliminate dangerous terrorists who are there to attack them and their people.
It's not about terrorists. It's about the idea
I'll get to that. So what I'm saying is the reality of the situation for many people. I'm not saying this is my own belief. I'm giving you a presentation here on what is presented to many people, is that the bombing of Palestinian targets is intended to attack terrorist military occupation.
That's a different point to what I'm making, though.
So I know what you're saying, but what I'm saying is the thought that comes into the head of the person that you're discussing Palestinian life with.
You don't know that.
I'm presenting an alternative narrative because of most of my interactions. And the reason why I'm bringing this up in the way that I am is I'll get to that in a moment, because the true fearful issue.
I'm talking about an Israeli sniper shooting an Israeli child, shooting an Israeli woman. I'm talking about.
Have you specified that very specifically?
Specified that very specifically.
So that exact scenario.
No.
Okay. So what I'm saying is, do you believe that you would have the same answer from many of the people? I'm not saying all. I'm not saying few.
I do believe
I'm not
so.
saying things.
Because
you would have the same.
Because they don't regard Palestinians as human beings. They regard all Palestinians.
Okay, so in my interactions, I won't have found a single human being that I've interacted with on this subject.
Sure, but I know more Jewish people than you do. So I'm saying the amount of Jewish people that I've engaged with over the years is frightening. Both ones I know and both ones I don't know.
Let me explain why I believe my point to be important.
The point you're making.
But let me explain why it's important.
And I'm not saying it's not an important point. I'm just saying it's not aligned to the point I'm making.
Okay,
it's a different point.
So what I'm saying, sure. So you're saying that
that a absurd amount of Jewish people I know and Jewish people that I don't know
that have been conditioned to believe wholeheartedly that Palestinian life is of extremely low to no value.
That there does not exist an innocent Palestinian. That all Palestinians are terrorists.
Even children,
yes,
women,
because they're going to grow up to be terrorists.
Okay.
That's the narrative a lot of them say. Kill them when they're young so that they don't become terrorists when they're older.
Okay. So let me explain why I'm extremely cautious in this, and not to protect my own arse, to protect me from getting cancelled, to protect me from things like my clients, social pressure, all of these things. The reason I'm extremely cautious on this subject in particular is because of two reasons. Is one, I think a dehumanization is very common and I fear it's actually on both ends of the stick. But however, Jewish people are less vulnerable at this moment in that region. Of course, far less vulnerable.
Well, they have a country, they have an army, they have
Yes.
intelligence services.
So that's why I'm saying.
They have the Iron
however,
Dome, they have bomb shelters.
yes. However, so I just want people to be careful in their interactions with each other. And this is a point I made early on in the eruption of the conflict, October 2023, the escalation in conflict now, was when I did choose to make a point, and I believe very few people should actually be making a point, if I'm honest. I know that there's a big narrative of people who are silent will be remembered. Your silence will be remembered. I don't like that remark. I believe most people should be silent, because you're tilting your head, and I'll explain why, is that most people are naive. They're unwilling and unable to go and do the deep research.
What you said in a different way. I agree with the point you're making.
Yeah. So I think, yes, I think most people should remain silent.
Rather than say something that's
misinformation. But they should listen. So I'm not saying that people should ignore the issues. I believe people should try and get themselves informed, but they shouldn't comment on things they shouldn't take an absolute stance on things and commenting on things and be loud online and debate on issues if they don't have a place in that debate, knowledge in that debate.
Completely aligns with what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I think this is why I'm saying this is important, is because I think that I personally have very little influence over what's going on in the region. I personally have very little influence on politicians, governments, anyone else who can have any influence on the conflict. However, my words, the hopes, is that I personally have influence over how one individual can treat another individual in any given scenario and case. And that is my biggest concern with this conflict. Not that I'm not concerned with the lives lost of both people. I could see the deep hurt amongst many of my Jewish friends when they saw their family members, neighbors, friends, people, and the fear that sits in Jewish hearts and minds post what happened to Jewish people in their recent history and further history.
See,
I will get further into that, and I know where you're getting to this, and I'll I'll let you explain that point. I just want to finish this point, is that I'm understanding of their fear. I'm understanding of their fear, and I see the hurt directly in what happened.
Their fear is manipulated. Their fear
is taken advantage of. I will get to that. It's
also something I've seen with so many Jewish people. They constantly think that the world is out to kill them all.
Sure, and I'll explain why I feel there's a vulnerability there. But what I'm saying, I'll get to it, because I'm a follower of history, and
I won the history prize.
Sure. Let's get through this point first. Sure. It's just that I want people's interactions to come from a greater place of kindness, and this is my greatest concern with all of this. Like I said, I'm not saying I'm not concerned with the conflict itself. I'm not saying I'm not concerned with the loss of civilian lives in both instances. I don't want to have the argument of whose civilian casualty loss is greater, because I dislike both of them.
We wouldn't have that argument.
Sure. So I'm not saying to you directly.
Everything you've said, I'm saying,
sure,
it is rhetorical.
Yeah.
Because of course you care about both people and you only want good.
So that's why I want to stress this point. Is, like I said, I'm not saying that I don't care about that. I said my absolute strongest message, fear, concern, interest in all of this is its impact on the greater public of the entire world, and how people are interacting with each other, how we continue to be pushed in a more and more binary manner. And we are getting pushed this way by powers that be that we should never be pushed this way. We have it with woke, liberal, left ideology coming out of North America versus conservative, right, extremist ideology in America. The binary push is huge in recent years. And this binary push is getting bigger and bigger through this conflict. And it's the biggest binary push I've seen.
How much innocent life is the left, liberal, woke side responsible for versus the right-wing conservative side? who
I'm not talking about better or worse or anything, Gary. That's the
you're saying
furthest thing away from my
you're saying
point.
they're
I'm
both
talking
bad.
about.
You're saying they're both bad.
I'm saying everyone's bad.
No,
You're
no,
allowed to hate
but,
everyone.
But I'm simply saying that one side is actually responsible for. You could pretty much say.
I don't care about bad or worse. I care about human beings' interactions with each other
But if
who
one
are
side is-
uninvolved in
if
sides.
If the one side
What
is,
about most people who aren't involved in sides, Gary?
No, but hold on. You made the distinction between left liberal woke
So
and right wing conservative.
not because of saying who's better or worse or either of those points. I'm making that point because it exists. And there's a binary nature of human beings today that is growing, that is deeply concerning to me. I don't care if the binary nature
You don't think it's
was
important to distinguish that the one side is actually responsible for killing a whole bunch
no
of innocent people, the
in
other
those,
side is not?
that's not the point that I'm making right now. The point I'm making right now, it could be a binary nature of McDonald's is better than Burger King. The way that people are fighting with each other over their binary ideology is the part that's deeply concerning to me, because I feel we can overcome any challenges of our history, of our futures, of our ideologies, beliefs, or anything. We can overcome that with kindness, empathy, and treating each other with a certain amount of respect. However, the more binary, the further apart we chase each other, the more extreme that we get with our behavior with each
But
other.
I'm confused. Even you going on this binary point at the moment, what were we discussing that was binary?
The idea of Palestine versus Israel. What I'm talking about is people's interactions with one another.
Yeah, so it seems like you're basing this off me saying that I've had tons of interactions with Jewish people.
I wasn't targeting you for this.
No,
at all.
I'm saying not targeting. It seems you're basing this off. It seems your point that you're saying now sprung from me saying that I've had lots of conversations with Jewish people I know and Jewish people I don't know.
Not at all.
Who just view all Palestinians as terrorists.
Not at all. I was just simply having a discussion with you at that point. This actually stems from, and if you watch it back, you'll see, me saying that as the conflict erupted, what became immediately concerning to me was people's interactions with one another.
But this has been going on for
I understand.
for
I'm
decades.
talking about people's interactions with one another away from the conflict.
No, but I'm saying, but there's nothing new on people's reactions and the binariness of it now and over the past decades.
Are you certain that there's nothing new in terms of the volume?
The volume?
The volume of interactions on this case? On this specific issue?
I wasn't specifying to volume. I'm saying the interactions are
So-
the same.
so I'm concerned-
Sure, there might be more.
so
there might
I'm-
be a higher volume of the same interactions, of the same binary reactions.
Yes.
There could very
So
well
that's
be,
what I'm saying
there
is
could
my
very well be
concern.
more
So
volume of it.
that is the point I'm making, is that I'm seeing a far greater volume in binary interactions, extreme hatred towards one another, extreme hatred towards one another, in interactions for people who are completely uninvolved, have no horse in the race, as it were. And what I'm saying is that if there's anything that I'm looking to put down in this, is it's simply this message, is that individuals who are unattached to the situation in the most extreme way need to treat each other with kindness, empathy, and not a binary, this is my view, fuck you for getting it
No,
wrong.
but of course. But you're saying like very, like that's the rhetorical points. I completely agree with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
And where I'm going with this in my next step is where I believe the vulnerability of Jewish people does sit globally in coming years and months, the way things are going right now.
And I'm saying that that vulnerability
Is made up.
is being manufactured, has been taken advantage of, has been manipulated, and it's nothing new. The volume might be more, but it's the exact same as it's always been, that many, many Jewish people, especially those of older generations, think that all Arabs just want to kill them. I've had so many conversations on Facebook, Jewish people I know, Jewish people I don't. The narratives are exactly the same because the conditionings are the same. That's why I started this by saying I started learning about World War II and the Holocaust and the associated themes of conditioning, propaganda, dehumanization at that age. And those have been themes that have been so important to me, because just as the Nazis dehumanized Jewish people, innocent women, innocent children, got other people, non-Jewish people around the world to follow those narratives, that they now didn't view Jewish people as humans. They viewed them as subhuman. Israel has been doing that to the Palestinians for decades. They've been so effective in their propaganda and their conditioning of not just Jewish people, but non-Jewish people, that Palestinians aren't proper human beings, that there is no real such thing as an innocent Palestinian. They're all terrorists. And that has allowed them to now start in earnest committing genocidal acts.
Okay, so Gary, you've got a volume of resources there that you wanted to discuss and present.
Okay, so as I was just saying a bit earlier, that all these resources, these quotes, these are from literally only Jewish people, Holocaust survivors, Israeli soldiers, Israeli historians, activists. It wouldn't be as effective as being able to share an article or a video, because I'm just going to be having screenshots and then what these people said, but it's still, I think, really effective. So this is from someone named Gabor Mate. He's a Holocaust survivor. And he said, take the worst thing you can say about Hamas, multiply it by 1,000 times, and it will still not meet the Israeli repression and killing and dispossession of Palestinians. Just to expand on that, I've came across a short 3-minute video that's only got Israelis, Jewish Israelis, confessing to what they did in 1948 against innocent Palestinians. And the stuff they confess to is literally 100% the same stuff that Hamas does to innocent Israelis. So we're talking about 75 years ago, Jewish Israelis, or Jewish people that, just as Israel was formed, were murdering, slaughtering children, putting people in cages and confessing to this stuff. One of the most valuable websites is Breaking the Silence. It's like .org.il, I think, and it's got an incredible amount of content from many Israeli soldiers, where they have now actually acknowledged their complicity and what they did and what they witnessed other people doing, which I think is as credible as any kind of first-hand evidence can be from people who actually committed acts, speak to the conditioning they went through that allowed them to commit those acts, and then later on realizing that what they were part of, what they committed, what they did was barbaric, was inhuman. So some of these might not be as resounding as what I just read from the Holocaust survivor. There's a very famous, I'm trying to think actually how to describe him. His name is Noam Chomsky. He had a quote saying, "You take my water, burn my olive trees, destroy my house, take my job, steal my land, imprison my father, kill my mother, bombard my country, starve us all, humiliate us, but I am to blame. I shot a rocket back." The last time the Western media manufactured this much propaganda against an Arab population, 1 million Iraqis were killed. You are now being conditioned to accept the mass killing of Palestinians, just like you were conditioned to accept the mass killing of Iraqis. There's video proof of dead Palestinian babies being pulled out the rubble in Gaza all over Twitter. Not a single British newspaper went with that as their front cover. They all went for the already contested and unverified claim of 40 beheaded babies. I mean, this has a bit to do with our own politics. So it's a picture of a Palestinian child, and I mean, this is a child younger than 10 years old, standing in front of a very big Israeli tank and throwing a stone at it. And the caption they have is, "I think the Cape should be independent, and farm murders made the #1 priority. Also blame in this image, also the child in this image is to blame." So this is someone who would be in Gaza saying, "Soon the last sliver of electricity and connection will be exhausted. If I die, remember that we were individuals, humans. We had names, dreams, and achievements, and our only fault was that we were just classified as inferior." This is something by an anti-racist activist named Ibram X. Kendi. I've read one of his books called How to Be an Anti-Racist. This is a lot more speaking to innocent people on both sides. He captioned it saying, "A word for peace. I stand in solidarity with all Israelis and Palestinians who are grieving the loss of their loved ones, who are grieving the destruction of their homes and neighborhoods, who are grieving as they lay in the presence of extreme uncertainty, as they stare off into a past and a future of incessant war, gruesome violence, and power creating and manipulating fear and hate to expand power. I stand in solidarity as an African American whose people have also experienced massacres, apartheid, forced removals, open-air prisons, terrorist violence, indiscriminate starving and murdering of young and elderly people, with racist ideas justifying all this carnage. I stand in solidarity as a human being with human beings all around the world, from Gaza to Geneva, from Tel Aviv to Tulsa, from Poltava to Pittsburgh, from the West Bank to West Africa, from Tijuana to Tripoli, from Jerusalem to Jakarta, who long for what we have never fully known, peace." I'll just say this last one. This is from Bertrand Russell. "The tragedy of the people of Palestine is that their country was given by a foreign power to another people for the creation of a new state. The result was that many hundreds of thousands of innocent people were made permanently homeless. With every new conflict, their numbers increased. How much longer is the world willing to endure this spectacle of wanton cruelty?" So, I mean, that's just some screenshots, but I mean, just to give you an idea, this is 60 emails, all of different videos, different content, most of it by Jewish people.
I'd like to finish off on that previous quote one more time, Gary, because I think that's the most important thing. I have a deep concern with the economic turmoil that's about to come across the planet in the coming years. Post-COVID pandemic, we've not felt the economic impact of that, of people losing their businesses, the amount of credit that was created to create vaccines, to do any number of things during the COVID pandemic, and how global economics works simply means that there is a downfall literally around the corner. And even though we've only just started feeling the effects, I think we have no common understanding of just how devastating an economic issue is going to become. And with major economic issues is where we see upturns in hatred, especially towards people of other races. And I think that there's certain groups of people that are extremely vulnerable now during these times to come. So I'd love to hear that last quote one more time and literally leave it on that, because I feel it's vitally important. And once again, if there's anything that we take from this, it's our interactions with other people.
So just to make sure, the last quote was Bertrand Russell saying the tragedy of the people.
The one
of
before
Palestine.
that.
Okay.
The one before that, sorry.
"I stand in solidarity with all Israelis and Palestinians who are grieving the loss of their loved ones, who are grieving the destruction of their homes and neighborhoods, who are grieving as they lay in the presence of extreme uncertainty, as they stare off into a past and a future of incessant war, gruesome violence, and power creating and manipulating fear and hate to expand power. I stand in solidarity as an African American whose people have also experienced massacres, apartheid, forced removals, open-air prisons, terrorist violence, indiscriminate starving and murdering of young and elderly people, with racist ideas justifying all this carnage. I stand in solidarity as a human being with human beings around the world, from Gaza to Geneva, from Tel Aviv to Tulsa, from Poltava to Pittsburgh, from the West Bank to West Africa, from Tijuana to Tripoli, from Jerusalem to Jakarta, who long for what we have never fully known, peace."
Beautiful. And I'd just like to thank you once again, Gary, for your time, for your bravery on this subject. I think that you are probably subjugated to a lot of anger, really, frankly. I was trying to find a better word for it, but anger from your own community. And I think that's extremely difficult to deal with, and coming on a public platform and doing it in the way that you are now shows a lot of bravery. So I commend you on that. Even though I believe, I think I see a lot more nuance in everything than what you're presenting, but there's certainly no disputing the damage that has been done upon the Palestinian people, and I'm non-religious, so I can't say I pray for them, but it's in my deepest, most human hopes that the people of Israel and the people of Palestine can find some sort of unity away from their extreme governments, away from their racist, away from their hatred, away from all of those things. And I deeply hope that there can be some unity in the region. So thank you once again for your bravery on all of this.
Could I play one song just as like an outro, which is exactly on what you said and that quote?
Send me the song and I'll add it in post-production.
Cool.
Okay? If I'm allowed to play it.
Yeah, no,
I don't believe I would be, but anyway,
No,
we'll,
you'd definitely
we'll
be
see.
able to, you'd definitely be able to
I
play
might
it.
just add it as a link, as a playlist.
Cool.
So that has been the Marco Martins Revolution, brought to you by Vodcast TV, Johannesburg's premier shared podcast studio platform. If you've ever wanted to host a podcast for yourself or your business, there's never been a better place to do it than right here. Get yourself a discount on your first order of a podcast or podcast series if you visit vodcasttv.com/revolution now. I'm Marco Martins. This has been Gary Berkowitz. And until the next time, stay together in peace and love and unity, and treat each other with some empathy.